Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Matthew Jane, and I am the Learning and Engagement Manager for the State Historical Society of Iowa. The Iowa History 101 webinars, presented on the second and fourth Thursdays of each month, explore Iowa's history from pre-statehood to current day. You can learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at history.iowa.gov. Please remember to sign up for each webinar you'd like to attend, and don't worry if you can't watch live. All presentations will be recorded. Now, a few housekeeping points before I introduce our speaker for today. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on the screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa Culture page of YouTube in just a few days. I've disabled the chat function, but if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague, Candy Riker, is watching the feature and will prepare a list of questions for the speaker at the end of the presentation. But please note we may not have time to get to all the questions. And now I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today. Rebecca Koerselman is an associate professor of history education at Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa. She did her undergraduate work at Northwestern College, achieved a master's in U.S. history and political science at Iowa State University, and her doctorate at Michigan State University in U.S. history, gender, and religious studies. She teaches classes in American history, gender, and religious history, and works with history education majors and overseas student and teachers. Recently, she developed and directs a graduate online program for history and social studies teachers at Northwestern College. She is currently collaborating on an institutional history of Northwestern College, as well as a manuscript on evangelical summer camps in the post-war era. And now I'm happy to turn to Rebecca to begin the webinar.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm really happy to be here talking about one of my favorite things, which is summer camps. And it's the perfect time of year to talk about summer camps as well. So I wanted to start by asking you, how many of you have had a summer camp experience? And then I want to ask, was it a meaningful experience? And I want you to think about why or why not. For some of you, this might have been a faith-based camp. And so the question I would have is, what is unique about a faith tradition and a summer camp experience? So I want you to think about that as I'm talking about these different summer camps that may or may not be similar or different to your own experiences. And hopefully in the Q&A, you can share some of those experiences with me. People have told me lots about their own summer camp experiences. Some they don't remember very well. Some formed lifelong friendships. For some, there was a romance or a breakup. Formative experiences, sometimes a skill that they worked on more recently, skill-based summer camps are more popular. And for many, there was a formative faith experience while at summer camp. Now, as a child, I also attended summer camp, and I have some different memories. And honestly, most of them are not entirely positive, which is a little bit funny. So I'll share one of those really quickly. So I was in upper elementary school, sitting on a bunk eating M&Ms, as one does. And the girl next to me said to me with a lot of authority, you know, eating those green M&Ms will make you gay. And I looked at her and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. She said, oh no, I saw an episode of 2020 on it. It's totally true. So that dates me a little bit. I don't know if anybody else remembers 2020 investigative journalism with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters from the early 2000s, or that was in the 90s. Anyway, that was one of my formative memories as a child. However, later in life, as a college student at Northwestern, I became staff at a summer camp. And those were much more fun experiences. And I'm glad that I was sort of able to redeem the summer camp by working at them as a camp counselor. So here's a picture of me, the early aughts at Tillicum. So I worked in Tillicum, which is Ministry of George Fox University out in Newberg, Oregon, and had a wonderful experience. I also worked at Manitoqua, which is outside of Chicago. And in this picture, first of all, I'm not practicing super great archery safety, but I really love how much the kids really bought into this moment and sold this picture. So thank you to those campers wherever they are now. So when I think about summer camps, what animates me about them is that they're very unique. Okay, they're a place where you're removed from your family and friends, which is unusual as a kid, right? It's school, there's social family obligations. But you're literally removed as a kid from family networks and sort of from school. It's usually outside of those experiences. There's usually some sort of instructive purpose or goal for the camp. And then the also other part about camp is that it's really ephemeral. It's really hard to research, for one, but it's not regulated like schools or other sort of programs where there's benchmarks and there's outcomes that you have to measure and goals. And yeah, that's what studying education is like. But a camp experience is really outside of that. And in some ways, that's the appeal, right? It's usually in a remote, isolated location, so you can't contact friends or family while you're there. You're sort of alone with the other campers and the staff. And I think it's fascinating, as I participated, it's staffed by really transitional workers, right? Often high school, college students, or visiting pastors who are there for a week, maybe present something and then are gone. So it's really hard to study them, but they're also more fascinating because they're so sort of rare and unique. So when I did this research project for my dissertation, for my doctorate, I was really animated by questions of how Christians in particular pass their faith to the next generation within a faith community that really requires some sort of personal commitment, and depending on where you are in that Christian commitment, some sort of conversion experience. So originally I wanted to do a project where I would contrast Jewish, Catholic, and then evangelical summer camps. And it was way too big of a project, sadly. Maybe someday I can still get there. So I ended up narrowing the focus to evangelicals, which is a hugely problematic term for studying a group of people. And I can elaborate more on this in the Q&A if you prefer. But I'm mostly using the scholar David Bevington's definition. So kind of loosely defining an evangelical as someone who finds scripture and the cross and salvation, conversion, and activism as sort of the core components of the faith. But the thing about looking at Christians in particular and evangelicals is that you find more liberal, more conservative, and you find kind of people all over the spectrum. So a lot of scholars have sort of used evangelical as kind of this broader umbrella term. So in the post-war era, this is kind of the heyday of evangelical summer camps. There's an enormous amount of anxiety and change in the 1940s and 50s after World War II ends. So I teach US history, so we spend a lot of time talking about the 1950s as an era of a lot of anxiety and sort of conformity. And you see this in the literature of the period and when talking to people. I love being able to talk to people who are still alive about this history. So we have a lot of things going on in the 1940s and 50s. Americans want to build character in American youth. This is the first time that the term teenager is actually used, and they're understood as like their own distinct group, and also consumers. And so we start to see marketing and targeting of consumer culture aimed at this new group of people. I mean, we've always had teenagers, but they were just never sort of called that until this era in the US. So we see Americans who are concerned about communism, they're concerned about the Soviets, they're concerned about going back into the Great Depression, they're concerned about what it means to be a world power, they're concerned about nuclear weapons and this arms race, and they're also very concerned about juvenile delinquency. So we see a lot of concerns and anxiety about America's youth. And so not surprisingly, we see Americans and particularly Christian and evangelical organizations target this. So this is also the era of the Billy Graham rallies. And we see this rise of parachurch organizations, many of which are still around. So things like Youth for Christ, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, Young Life, Campus Crusade for Christ. All of these sort of outside of the traditional denominational structures become much more popular and prevalent during this period. Now, I tend to think camp is even more effective than those organizations because it's isolated and separated and more concentrated, and it's tied to nature, and you can connect directly with young people through adults that are not their parents or not generally connected to them in a family way. So as part of this larger project, I looked at gender and the different gender roles for girls' camps and boys' camps. I looked at environment and race. So a lot of the evangelical camps are maybe more progressive than some of us would think in their views on the environment and caring for God's creation. A lot of evangelical subculture in the 1950s is predominantly white, but there's a couple examples of evangelical summer camps that are talking about race, because school integration starts with Brown versus Board in 1954. So those are conversations that are happening. There's even, I'm not going to talk about this one today, but there's a camp out in California that actually worked on racial integration and reconciliation at the summer camp. So even though that's not the norm, we still see evidence of that. I also looked at, there was a camp in New Mexico where the students, the campers all did these speeches about what it means to be a Christian, and then all these sort of political issues of the current events of the day that they engaged with. And so we also see that young people don't want to abandon American culture, but they want to transform it and they want to engage in that. And that's something that's really unique about the post-war period, is that we see organizations, instead of sort of shying away from popular culture, engaging in that and working really hard to connect to American youth and youth culture. So what I've found in my research is that these summer camps are maybe more progressive by today's standards. Of course, I mean, history is always an interaction between where we currently stand in the present and the past. And yeah, maybe depending on what people think or have studied, they're clearly not a monolith, but they're pretty diverse in their interests in social and political engagement, gender roles, racial reconciliation, environmental concerns. And of course, the significance is these are the leaders that become predominant in the 1980s and 90s, and I would argue even into the present, and have made evangelicals a real cultural force in American history. Okay, so today I'm going to highlight some Iowa summer camps and highlight some different aspects of each one. So we're going to look at 5 different Iowa camps. And I feel like I should say I'm not affiliated with any of these camps. I visited them and did some research, and they were all very lovely, hospitable, wonderful people. And so I took this just from their current website. So all 5 of the camps are still currently in existence. And I don't know about their current existence so much as I studied kind of the origins and when they got started in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So that's what I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to start by talking about Wesley Woods in Indianola, Iowa in 1956. So this is a unique Christian experience that's really engaging and focused on youth and tied to nature in particular. So Wesley Woods began in 1956 as a 54-acre of abandoned sandstone quarry land near Lake Aquaby. So the camping board vision wanted a themed camp where they could live in the woods, cook meals over the fire, and become more connected with nature. So according to one of the Methodist pastors, it was, quote, vital to their total Christian experience. So the youth of the Iowa Des Moines Conference of the Methodist Church made the reality of a conference ground and summer camps. It was the young people who made it happen. The purchase resulted from, quote, the prodding of the church youth, who each gave, I love this, $10 to the camp effort, and so impressed the conference that the land was purchased, end quote. So the youth workers are the ones who wanted this, and they'd been asking for it for more than 10 years. So working together, the youth and the youth workers formed their own committee on camps and institute, because money was coming in to fund this, and they needed somebody to keep track of it. So they formed this committee, which appeared before the conference board on education, and decided the money should be taken care of and properly invested to draw interest. The committee was also empowered to find land if a proper one could be found. And then they carefully studied different offers and purchased from Gordon Shaver of Indianola at the price of $100 per acre in 1954, and approved by the annual conference of 1954. And the author of this article said that from the young people, they said, quote, the site is ours. From here on, it is up to you who are youth, adults interested in youth, to see how fast the development may progress. And Yeah, so looking at Wesley Woods, it's abundantly clear that denominational support and denominational organization both created the need for the campsite and the vision as a place to engage with youth through retreats and activities. So another article from the Wesley Woods archives talks about, quote, "We've long needed a campsite in southern Iowa to serve Christ and our people. The total cost of developing the site will be less than the cost of construction of our larger church sanctuaries and will cost little more to maintain if adequately used. The sum would be very small indeed when we consider the number of youth which might be reached for Christ every summer through an enlarged camping program." But the best info is, of course, the feedback from the campers. So this is what some of them had to say. "Not only do I learn about our Savior, but I meet and make new friends. I have a chance to learn how to lead in recreation and to learn how to present a worship service that is not just scripture, song, and prayer." So there's a lot of emphasis of leadership training at summer camps, which is a pretty common theme in most of them. Another person said this, quote, "Camp is a wonderful experience. You meet new friends and have a kind of fellowship there that cannot be attained anywhere else." So even when I was a staff member, we talked about this. Summer camp is like, it's such a unique experience that you can't recreate, because even when we would get together outside of camp, and meet up, it was fun and it was great, but it wasn't the same. There's something really unique about that experience. It's very elusive, maybe because it's impossible to recreate in normal life. So in the words of one of the directors, quote, "Thousands of our church youth every summer leave behind them the schoolroom, the city streets, the noise, the bustle, the competitive activities of our culture, the close support and supervision of the family, the multitude of planned for them activities, and the security of not having to face themselves and be on their own, and take off for camp." And I think that captures some of that sort of uniqueness away from supervision and away from family and friends. Camps like Wesley Woods cited the spiritual experience of growing closer to God or experiencing some sort of call to ministry as a primary reason for the uniqueness of the experience. So one of the publications says this, quote, "Look," said the young minister, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder, "here is Wesley Woods, our new camp. Won't our week together here be wonderful? We'll sing and work and study and pray. We'll get to know each other better than we possibly could back home. We'll do some listening too and hear the words of the one who was the master at living in God's great out of doors. He will call to us. We'll be listening, won't we?" "Yes," said the boy, "and we'll answer too." So the article encouraged full-time service at Wesley Woods, saying, "Would you like to this summer challenge some young person to a life of service in Christ's name, as a minister, an agricultural missionary in some blighted land, as a worker in the jungle areas of some great city?" Another Methodist pastor put it this way, "At summer camp, one can lead young people and adults through and into a concentrated, cumulative, adventurous religious experience, which is difficult to duplicate anywhere else." Now, I also want to make clear, it's not as if summer camps didn't claim that a call or some sort of religious experience. They never said that could only happen at camp. It was just an ideal setting away from daily life and distractions. Another youth said this, "I felt closer to God than I'd ever been before. I thought my prayers had really reached him. When I came back home, it felt as though a new world had opened up for me." And this camp literature sort of shows the support by demonstrating the ways that they so effectively had religious experiences at camps like Wesley Woods. And so here's some of the early publications checking out the site for where it could be. And then I love this sort of map with the projections for what the campground could look like. But you can see it's like a lot of summer camps, right? It's rustic and it's fairly isolated. Okay, next I'm going to talk about Camp Wyoming. It's still a camp, but it's now changed its name to Bear Creek. And I just looked yesterday on their website, and Camp Wyoming, it does talk about in its history, it talks a little bit about how it used to be named Camp Wyoming. And this is, not surprisingly, in Wyoming, Iowa. And I'm going to focus on the ways that denominational support and sustenance was key in the construction of this camp. So the story of Camp Wyoming and its founding is at the behest of the local Presbyterian, provides evidence for the continued strength and importance of the mainline Presbyterian denomination. So mainline denominations have sort of largely over the 20th century and into the 21st been in decline. But the summer camp shows that for most summer camps, they are connected to denominations, and we'll see why. The denomination played a pivotal role in the establishment, especially with regards to raising the necessary funds to start and sustain the camp, as well as providing the staff and the campers to attend. So Camp Wyoming began as an idea in the Cedar Rapids Presbytery when a committee was appointed in the spring of 1957 to investigate the possibility of a new church camp. The committee not only agreed that a church camp was a good idea, but they found and recommended 2 different plots of land that were ideal for a campsite. The trustees voted to borrow up to $2,000 and take out a mortgage on the 40 acres. By the fall of 1957, the presbytery was ready to begin development, and in 1958, 106 acres of property were acquired for $4,500. Then we see in 1959, some of the local presbyteries combined, which include combined support for this new camp. So Cedar Rapids and the Dubuque Presbyteries united to form the Northeast Iowa Presbytery and the Southeast Iowa Presbytery, and they were persuaded to support this camp as well. In the fall, there was a camp corporation and board of trustees, which were elected by the Northeast and the Southeast Presbyteries, and an additional 192 acres of land was purchased. By September of 1962, the Presbyterians, all of them in Eastern Iowa, were invited to the dedication, quote, to the glory of God and church's ministry to youth and adults in Eastern Iowa. The first session of camp took place in the summer of 1961 as a junior high camp with 24 campers, boys and girls, and 5 adults. The Reverend Edwin Ewing Hancock was the director and recalled, quote, one cabin had been built that summer. We used it as a kitchen and a dining hall. The campers were housed in tents with wood floors. So like most camp programs that began in the post-war era, they have a strong vision and a rustic reality. But funny thing is, maybe I remember some bug bites and stuff, but I remember the rustic part is like a non-issue and sort of part of the fun, the charm, and yeah. So having like crummy water or a not good bathroom sort of added to the fun of the experience. Maybe family vacations, that maybe makes it worse, but for some reason, summer camps makes it fun and cool. Let's see. Reverend George Jaden, pastor of the Presbyterian Church of Wyoming Onslow in 1958, narrated this story. He was on a committee of the Presbytery with the express purpose of discovering a location for a campsite in the area, and an elder from the church, Leanne Coleman, owned a pasture, and he wanted to sell as he was, quote, getting to be kind of a burden. So Jaden saw the land, mulled it over, mentioned to it, and Coleman responded by saying, quote, if the church wants to buy it for a camp, I'll cut my price. Soon after the cattle roundup and conversations between Jaden and Coleman, Jaden presented the slides of Coleman's pasture and the timber property to the presbytery. And then to acquaint people with it, they were invited to a steak fry on the green pasture. And one of the men, who was the father of Reverend Ralph Adamson, who became later, cool connection, full-time program director for Camp Wyoming in the mid-70s. Next, the presbytery hired a camp specialist from Minnesota to look over the land. According to Jaden, quote, when he saw the open grassland surrounded by timber and bluffs, he stated, you don't want 55 acres of this. You should have 400 acres of this for a campsite. I had no idea there was anything like this in Iowa, end quote. Ha! As we all know, right? Anytime you leave the interstate, Iowa is lovely. Anyway, that made me laugh from Minnesota. Okay, after hiking around Coleman's property, as well as some adjoining property, Jaden recalled that they knew if the camp was to expand, it would be a good idea to chat with some of the people who owned it, surrounding land. So he knew somebody else who owned another farmer. Quote, one evening I pulled up to his place and he was still in the barn milking. So I pulled up a stool and started speaking in general about the farm and cows. And he just looked at me and said, oh, Reverend Jaden, I understand your church is looking to put a camp on Coleman's land. I've got 40 acres adjoining that land. If you guys want it, you can have it for what I paid for it 20 years ago. And so Reverend Jaden says, he brought up the subject. I never even had to ask. Best advancement call ever. So a lot of post-war summer camps like Camp Wyoming attribute their success to this kind of denominational support. One of the authors noted over the past 40 years, they've been a partner in ministry with the Presbyterian churches in the area, and now covered by East Iowa and John Knox. They've always been at the forefront of providing leadership and support for Camp Wyoming, and without this faithful and ongoing support, the camp would not exist. The author also talks about all the different blessings from the ministry, which included youth leadership development, church session, committee planning, family enrichment, faith growth in young and adults, and, quote, a quiet resting place for those who need spiritual refreshment. So they see this as a direct outgrowth of their sort of church ministry for children, adults, and for families. Quote, and they talk about those who've had life-changing experiences at camp, and many have been challenged and renewed in their faith. So some of the booklets that promote the local support also connect themselves really clearly to the Presbyterian denomination. So initially it said on the large letters on the front page, developed, owned, and operated by the presbyteries of Northeast Iowa and Southeast Iowa. And then it had information for the local pastor, the session, the acquisition of the property, the camp architect, preliminary plans, and then asked for money. So the author wrote, quote, it's sincerely hoped that 100% of our sessions will recommend the per capita gift each year to their congregations. It is further hoped that the sessions will encourage the cooperation of the local organization of their churches. And then concluded with this statement, quote, it suggested that Rural Life Sunday on May 7 of 1961 be the perfect time to emphasize the importance of the camp in the local congregation to try and get those donations. And men, women, and youth were all encouraged to contribute to specific portions of the camp, which was underscored by this connection between raising funds and serving God. The booklet invited youth groups to contribute funds to recreation in a variety of ways. So families were encouraged to contribute to a family campsite, which was a picnic shelter and like a little family campground. And it was declared one of the fastest growing Christian experiences is family camping, which will receive lots of attention. It also asserted, quote, the younger married bracket in the United Presbyterian Church constitutes a very potent force. This makes us optimistic about the successful outcome of this particular project. Even the United Presbyterian women are offered the, quote, privilege of providing for the construction of the dining hall. The booklet noted, while the dining hall may not be aptly described as the heart of camp, I might disagree with that. Meal times were some of my favorites. No one minimizes its importance. It would seem appropriate if the United Presbyterian women were offered the privilege of providing for its construction, because of course they're building for the glory of God. The men are encouraged to contribute to the dam and the lake, as a beautiful lake will do much to enhance the enjoyment and the inspiration. The local United Presbyterian men's chapters were also encouraged to raise funds for the waterfront equipment to make the lake a reality. And again, reminded, however it is done, each group should look on its efforts as serving the Lord. So I use that as an example, even though Camp Wyoming does lots of other different things really well, to show how important this denominational support is for most of the camps in this particular era. Okay, and here I have some images of the initial location of the camp. And then sort of an example of the fundraiser, like here, if you can contribute to this part, you can contribute to this part to help us raise money and expand this camp. So I appreciated the way that fundraising and ministry is really seen as part of the United Presbyterian congregational experience, that's sort of, it's assumed to be part of being a part of the Presbyterian Church. Next, I'm going to talk about Lutheran Lakeside Camp in Spirit Lake, Iowa, which emphasizes some really great vocational Christian training. So this was founded in 1959, I think, yep, it even says it on their current website, by the United Lutheran Church, the Iowa Synod, and focused on youth discipleship and training for Christian vocations through the Lutheran denomination. So you also see a really strong denominational connection here. So its three main objectives: the camp would provide Christian training by implementing the best in programs and leadership, offer the experience of living together in Christian community, to prepare and encourage intelligent leadership in the church through lay workers and full-time ministry, and also to use nature, crafts, skills, worship, recreation, and group living to achieve these three objectives. They also have a specific camp philosophy spelled out as part of the Iowa Synod of the United Lutheran Church in America, and it read, quote, "Through its nature setting and the style and intensity of its program, this camp intends to help each camper, whatever their age, to respond and witness more faithfully and adequately to the Word of God." It then lists the 7 ways to achieve these objectives, starting with quickening and deepening the Christian commitment, giving a sense of Christian vocation and providing direction for the choice of vocation. Next, it talks about developing potentialities for Christian leadership, followed by providing opportunities for contacts with Christian leaders and opportunities for personal counseling with them, as well as providing experience in cooperative Christian living. The final 2 objectives were broadening the conception of Christian community and widening perception in it, as well as interpreting the religious values of God's total creation. So we see a little bit of an environmental emphasis, but predominantly this is about preparing people to be maybe future pastors or leaders, youth group leaders, maybe participate in parachurch organizations, maybe in missionary work, local or maybe abroad, or also maybe in camp ministry. But it's sort of specifically focused at preparing evangelicals to be leaders in the community. So this discussion of leadership is really, training is really dominant, and this Christian commitment to service. So it could be part-time ministry in the church, denomination, or the mission field. It could encompass all kinds of also sort of part-time voluntary work as well, which is which is in keeping with larger trends in post-war summer camps. So there was a youth program called the Iowa Luther League, and it sort of connected this to the summer camp experience. Any young person in the Iowa Synod of the United Lutheran Church between the ages of 12 and 20 was considered eligible to attend the Iowa Luther League Bible Camp. So it appealed to youth, leaders, pastors interested in these camp programs, and ideally ones that wanted to start or lead their own camp programs in local or permanent settings. So they wanted to provide a model for the camp program and to train leaders how to do this themselves. And then they rotated different locations around Iowa each year. So the Luther League Bible Camp Pledge of Loyalty said this, quote, "We, the members of the Luther League of Iowa, do recognize and acknowledge that faith in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, whose death on the cross atoned for our sins, is the only way through which we may obtain salvation and life everlasting. We deem it our desire and purpose to earnestly and sincerely live our lives after the example of Jesus Christ. This means we will attend regularly and faithfully the worship services of our church, be diligent in our attendance at church, school, and Luther League, denominational check there, be loyal to God in our private lives by daily prayer and daily Bible reading, and always conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of the name Christian. We further pledge our loyalty and help to the executive board of the Luther League of Iowa, fully realizing the many important duties this board must perform." So you can clearly see the denominational connection. The Luther League motto was "of the church, by the church, and for the church." So showed that yes, the faith commitment was important, but also being guided by the specific teachings of the Lutheran Church and working with the church to spread the gospel. The Luther League Bible Camp also talked about their discipleship a lot more than they talked about conversion. Now, a lot of this literature doesn't specifically speak a lot about conversion, and that can have, there can be different reasons for that. And I think one of the main ones is there's an assumption that that has already taken place or that will take place, but there's kind of an assumption that the people who are coming to these camps have heard the gospel before and they're more interested in pursuing this as a full-time occupation or maybe as a part-time or just as a way to live out their faith. So the camp explained that, quote, "Bible camping is a very personal experience and has become a vital part of the growing up process of young people." I love that. This seems to indicate summer camps, particularly evangelical, are becoming much more not rare and sporadic, but like a well understood rite of passage for a lot of young people, maybe even expected if you're part of one of the mainline denominations. They also spelled out their objectives as that having, let's see, ensuring all campers the best in outdoor living, combined with a spiritual experience that is both rich and deep. The spiritual objectives were spiritual growth, physical health, emotional well-being, social adjustment and growth, fun and fellowship, safety. I love that that one's near the bottom. New interest and appreciations, and then inspiration for Christian service. So it is interesting, though, that it doesn't include some sort of conversion or commitment language, which is maybe a typical expectation for evangelical summer camps, maybe more in the 70s, 80s, and in the current era. But instead, the emphasis is clearly on discipleship and growth of Christians into well-rounded leaders. A song entitled At Bible Camp, which I'm not going to sing for you, but it does say this, ends with this verse: Jesus called us and we answered Christ, we are thine own. We will follow thee, our master, worship humbly at thy throne. So there is kind of some embedded conversion language in there, but more of an emphasis on this vocational training. Okay, so I also think the course study reveals a pretty sophisticated grasp of biblical familiarity, which points to the camp as more of a place for believers and leaders, and not necessarily a place for someone who's never been to church. So the courses also demonstrate a clear commitment to the Lutheran emphasis. So there's a course entitled Studies in Galatians. There's a program of a course in Marriage in the Home. Would have loved to see the curriculum on that. For those 18 and older, concerning itself with the planning of life's partnership, love that, as well as a course on the Christian and race, which was open to high school campers, and endeavored to, quote, answer the questions young people are asking about race. The solution to the problem of how to be a Christian in race relations will be indicated. Again, I would love to have my hands on that curriculum, but it doesn't exist as far as I know. So, but it is interesting to see the way that they're engaging with the issues of the day in a really forthright way. There are also other electives. Any guesses on this one? The Life of Martin Luther, that's correct. Patterns of Christian Life, which sort of talk about Bible study, worship, prayer, and service. Christian Service Today. There was also a specific study of the Synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which was a required course for the younger students. Then there was electives. They could choose from Our Lutheran Heritage. They could choose from boy-girl relationships. That also would be really fascinating, which featured, quote, the best possible approach to coming courtship and marriage, end quote. There was also one on 20th century disciples. What does it mean to be a Christian in this our day? So again, engaging with the current popular culture issues. We also saw recreational leadership for those who planned to go to sort of camp ministry. We also see a study of the Gospel of John. That was also required. There were electives on manhood of the master, so a little bit of the muscular Christianity coming out here. A study of the characteristics and virtues of Jesus and how those could be applied to our lives together, and how we worship, how to, let's see, Christian vocations. So we have a wide variety of different things that show this interest in training young people, but also that they're not afraid to engage with the current issues of the day. So this gives us significant insight into the ways that the Lutheran leadership understood the discipleship of post-war youth and the significance of engaging in these relevant issues of the day. Overall, programs like Luther League, summer camp programs like Camp Wyoming, Wesley Woods, and Lutheran Lakeside sort of show also these important denominational connections in implementing these post-war camp programs, and the strong emphasis on discipleship, preparing future leaders for ministry, usually within the existing denominational frameworks. And I have some pictures here of sort of the plan as well for the initial camp. Okay. Then I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the East Iowa Bible Camp in Deep River, Iowa, in 1946. And they focus more on conversion, and it's an example of an interesting non-denominational summer camp. So the narrative of this captures a key component of these non-denominational affiliated post-war summer camps, which is an emphasis on saving souls and conversion. So a lot of the mainline denominations are very popular. The non-denomination ones are much smaller in number, and they provide sort of a different experience for campers that's more focused on conversion. Now, of course, denominational camps would certainly agree that saving souls and conversion are important, but in most of the promotional literature that I examined, that conversion language is sort of de-emphasized, and instead they talk about discipleship, preparing future leaders, pastors, teachers, missionaries, church workers. Non-denominational camps also talk about discipleship, but their emphasis is more on conversions and reaching the unchurched part of the population. So they also don't have the benefit of denominational membership. So they have to cast a much wider net to find campers instead of relying on sort of the infrastructure. Okay, so they have to find their own sources of support. And sometimes they even find themselves kind of in competition with some of the denominational camps to appeal to potential campers. So most of the promotional literature is pretty self-conscious in their effort to underscore the evangelical credentials as Bible-believing programs that can reach youth of any background. So the East Iowa Bible Conference of Deep River, Iowa, consisted of both the EIBC personnel, which stood for the East Iowa Bible Conference, not the camp. So that's sort of confusing that C stands for conference and not camp. But said, quote, having had its birth in much prayer in the fall of 1943, the building of the camp began in the winter months of 1944. By July, the camp was sufficiently ready to hold some 60 girls and 33 boys in 2 10-day periods. In 1945, the program of the conference was enlarged to include a junior camp, an adult conference, a youth conference, and a men's camp. So it has a similar schedule, and then it adds sort of a pastoral conference as well. So it had modern facilities of 10 cabins, having close to 100 people, 2 guest dormitories, a main building with a tabernacle and a basement, and a shower room. Quote, located in beautifully wooded section, land 9 miles east of Deep River, 4 miles west of Millersburg, calm, quiet setting of the camp invites communion with God. And it says this, quote, the blessing of the Lord has been upon the work of the conference is evidenced by the fact that reports of spiritual victories continually come from concerning those who attend the various camps. It is the prayer of the conference leaders that this approval of God may continue to rest upon its work and be even more apparent during the 1946 season. We extend a cordial invitation to spend your vacation in the beautiful East Iowa Bible Conference ground dedicated to the task of helping you know Christ and to make him known. So the promotional material talks about camp as an eternal investment, saying, quote, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Talks about sort of how you can support the camp. And it says, quote, we desire to pay off our debts as soon as possible. This is a faith work dependent upon the gifts of God's people, not the denomination. There's no other such work in this section of Iowa. We invite your investigation and assistance. It also talks about redeeming the times, for the days are evil, which gives a little bit of that more conservative apocalyptic kind of language and sort of this pressing need to save souls. Talks about souls have been saved in each camp, and focused on this sort of experience of conversion. So as I said, most denominational camps would also sort of agree with that. But looking at a little bit more conservative non-denominational camps that are more focused on saving souls, conversion, and reaching the unchurched. Okay, so here we have some of the early groups of campers at the East Iowa Bible Camp, and then some of their great, it's wonderful. I love that part of the brochure, but good preaching, Bible study, outdoor life, recreation. It's more like about the experience of learning about God than necessarily training for a particular vocation. And then I also love this one. Join this caravan going to camp. What could be better? Okay, I'm going to end with Riverside Lutheran Bible Camp. So this is another, obviously, Lutheran camp. at Story City, Iowa in 1943, which focuses on conversion and discipleship, but also particular engagement with popular culture. So A.J. Bringle had a vision of an evangelical summer camp that was realized in Riverside Lutheran Bible Camp. The focus of the camp was clear: for campers to experience Jesus in a, quote, new and more personal way, end quote. The camp banner said, "The main purpose of our Bible camp is to make Jesus better known to the campers and to guide them into conscious faith in him, that they might live the life which is in his name and live truly Christian lives. Pray that God might use our Bible camp to magnify Jesus Christ by leading boys and girls into the life which is in his name," right? So we see conversion and discipleship in that literature. So campers spent their mornings and afternoons listening to different speakers teach about the Bible. And in their discussion or in these sessions, campers were encouraged, quote, to speak out, question, or even disagree with their teachers, end quote, which I love that as a teacher, which is a very significant departure from traditional teaching methods of rote memorization and ingestion of teachings without critical analysis. So I love that that's sort of emphasizing that this is a much more discussion-based and thoughtful discussion of these topics. So they engaged with topics like smoking, dancing, movies, marriage and marriage age, Bible reading, and even attitudes of Christians in the armed forces, all really fascinating. These new methods emphasized campers to question aspects of their faith and culture, reveals the recognition by a lot of the camp leadership of the need to engage with popular culture to effectively reach post-war youth. Some found this camp experience as responsible for the revitalization of an entire generation of evangelicals. So this is one, he was on A.J. Bringle's first staff at Riverside Lutheran. Quote, "I was honored to have been asked to train Bringle's first staff. This marked a key moment in the life of Bible camping. Clergy, lay adults, and parents saw the unique contribution made in the life of campers by young adults who walked their faith alongside of campers. During this period, the program of our Bible camps became more diversified with cool things like backpacking, canoe tripping, leadership, horse programs, vagabond camping. A wider range of children, youth, and adults were served. These programs were made possible because of the advanced training that summer staff members received. The maturity of returning staff members allowed for many program advances. Later, it was learned that 70% of clergy and lay leadership in the ALC, American Lutheran Church, could point to their camp experience as being a defining turning point in their faith journey, end quote. It's remarkable to connect the significant majority of clergy and lay leadership to these summer camp experiences. I wish I had data, but evangelicals are and were reluctant to gather and provide data on the number of people who were saved or who dedicated or rededicated themselves to some sort of evangelical ministry. So this particular statement is really insightful. We can only sort of anecdotally see for how many people was a camp experience the formative experience for what they ended up doing for the rest of their lives or becoming key leaders within the evangelical church of whatever denomination or a non-denominational. So numbers always vary, but a lot of evangelicals, that's probably the most I can say, can assert that their summer camp experience was significant in that converting. Now, I do also want to give a caveat. That doesn't mean that everybody who went to summer camp had this wonderful life-affirming conversion and discipleship experience. So not everybody who went to evangelical summer camps in the 1940s and 50s became a leader in the religious right or the moral majority of the late 1970s and early 80s. So Randall Balmer is a scholar on American evangelicalism, well known. He's been doing this for a while. And he talks about his own summer camp experience. And I appreciate his perspective as a camper, but also as a scholar of American evangelicalism. And he says this, quote, "I sat next to a fire and shifted uneasily on the stony ground. My repeated attempts to appropriate the faith of my parents was imperfect, as I realized even then. Summer camp was where I tried annually to get it right, to conjure the same piety that my elders showed, to claim the elusive victory in Christ that they professed. More often than not, what I felt instead was defeat and inadequacy, a gnawing sense of the persistent doubts that I harbored about God and Christianity, or my occasional transgressions of the fundamentalist behavioral codes that would consign me to damnation. Then he said, however, what brought me back each year, quote, aside from the perennial elusive quest for summer romance, funny, appreciate that honesty there. He said this, quote, the same reason that our parents want us there. We too want to claim the faith, not merely to win our parents' approval, but also because of a deep yearning for this religious experience that will meet our expectations and dispel our anxieties. We seek, above all, an experience that will yield a spiritual fulfillment that we see, or at least we think we see, in our parents. And that experience does come to some. Others grasp it for a time and then lose it year after year. Still others find the standards too high and abandon the quest in frustration or despair, end quote. So not everybody experiences a calling. Not everyone had a life-changing experience, but certainly it was very formative and very influential. So in closing, I just want to say that evangelical summer camps are not new in the 1940s and 50s. Religious and secular camps existed before the turn of the century, starting around the 1880s, blossoming, continuing to grow. But there's something unique about them in the 1940s and 50s, as evangelicals connect the importance of summer camp with conversion, with training, and the discipleship of American youth for the purpose of preparing the next generation of evangelical leadership. So the study of post-war evangelical summer camps and these examples in Iowa, in particular, are an examination of the ways that evangelical adults understand their own identity and how they try and envision passing on that faith and that evangelical identity to the next generation. For evangelicals, this required new tactics to appeal to this new generation of teenagers. They focused on engaging with popular culture as evidenced in the rallies and meetings of post-war parachurch organizations, but also on creating environments where learning about the evangelical faith was fun and was active, as evidenced in summer camps. So that's what I have to say about it. And now I would love to engage with you guys in the Q&A and see what questions and experiences from camp that you all have.
Sorry, Rebecca, we had some technical difficulties.
That's okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We do have a time to answer a few questions. Just as a reminder, if you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A. Please note we may not be able to get
Rebecca, we're going to do it through my computer. I'm so sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
We usually don't have any problems, so we apologize.
That's okay. We're going for the
so a
summer
question we
camp
have
experience. It's
what
rustic.
were some common traits for a location where these camps originated?
That's a great question. Usually availability. I mean, bodies of water are great as far as like canoeing, swimming, sort of having a ready-made kind of water feature. Those are usually primary, but it's not a requirement. The summer camp I attended, there was a pool. There wasn't, right? So if it's not going to be a lake or somewhere where you can swim, then often it'll be sort of wooded, and just sort of like different from city. But it varies, right? In Iowa, you know, we don't have the mountains or other places that other states might have. But most of it comes down to availability of land, because most presbyteries and churches and organizations can't like buy up really expensive land. Maybe an exception would be Camp Geneva along the lakeshore of Lake Michigan. So I studied Camp Geneva as well. They own multi-million-dollar property, but that only kind of happened later, that they're right on Lake Michigan there. But yeah, usually availability is the trick.
Awesome. Thank you. Where was your favorite place to find resources for your research, or was there a favorite resource you found?
So let's see, the Southern Baptist Archives had really great stuff, and that's where I found Camp Crest Ridge for girls and Ridgecrest for boys, and I could do kind of a comparison. They also, the Southern Baptists in their archives had this speech tournament that they held at their camp in Glorieta, New Mexico. And so they had students create their own speeches and had a contest. I mean, who thinks of that sort of at summer camp? But it was great because they talked about like what I want to be as like a woman or wife and mother, or working as a missionary, or going into the armed forces, or engaging with all of these great issues. Now I have to say all the camps in Iowa that I visited were so sweet and lovely. The problem is camps change hands, different program directors. So many of them burned, or a building burned, and they're like, well, we got a shoebox with some random stuff in the back that you can look at. Okay, I'll take it. And the biggest missing piece for me in all of this is the voices of the campers themselves, right? Most of that is sort of lost or very difficult to find, which is one of the reasons I love talking to people about their camp experiences. But most of the camper experiences that are saved are the positive ones, right? We don't hear the ones that had a horrible experience at camp, or, and we know those happen too, but it's because the study of childhood and adolescence is tricky. And preserving postcards and letters back and forth from camp, it's just not usually preserved. So so those are some of the more fun sources that I found. But yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky finding information on it.
Awesome. Thank you. No, that was a great answer. And we do have time for one more question. The question we have is, as the number of campers at faith-based camps has declined over the last 20 years, what do you see as the future of summer camps?
So one of the reasons I kind of study 1945-ish to around 1960 is after 1960, we see the rise of more skill-based camps, right? So like my kids just did a soccer camp. There's a lot of sport-based camps. There's art-based camps, theater camps, horse camps, right? We have much more, they're not really faith-based. So yes, there is sort of a decline in this. I think, so a lot of them have transformed and kind of into retreat centers. And I feel like that has a lot more cultural traction, especially with the rise of social media and technology, that a lot of people are looking for ways to unplug and check out and sort of leave. So if we thought, like that quote I read about the bustle of cities, right? Imagine going into sort of a tech-free space, right? Which now is more radical, to like go camping with no Wi-Fi and no technology. And I think if faith-based camps want to keep growing or maintain their vitality, I think that's kind of the emphasis that they need to emphasize to stay relevant in sort of our current day and age, as a way to sort of check out and get away from technology, maybe especially for young people, to leave the pressures of social media and to just engage sort of socially with each other. But as maybe some of you guys know, those of us who lived before cell phones and had social lives, it's still hard. Young people are still hard on each other, and those relationships and cliques and navigating all that is still tricky. But I think the technology and sort of checking out, exchanging technology for nature is probably the big draw in our current day and age.
That was a great answer, Rebecca. Thank you. And with that answer, we will bring this webinar to a close. Thank you to everyone joining us today. And we would like to extend one last thank you to our presenter, Rebecca.
Thank you.
We hope everyone will sign up for the Iowa History 101 webinars that take place on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays throughout the year. There are many great stories to tell in the upcoming months. For more information and to register for future webinars in this series, or to watch recordings, check out our website at history.iowa.gov. Looking to learn more Iowa history? You can find and watch over 50 recorded webinars of past 101 programs on the Iowa Culture YouTube channel. We look forward to virtually seeing you for the next Iowa History 101 webinar on June 27th. The topic will be From Relish Trays to Old Fashions, Sampling Iowa Supper Clubs. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.